Laura Klinger is only the third director of Teach since Eric Schopler took over as director in 1976 after co-founding Teach in 1972 with Robert Reichler. And then Gary succeeded Eric in 1993. Laura has been Teach director since 2011. Under her leadership, the transition from Eric and then Gary to Laura has been seamless. Laura has continued Teach on its foundation principles while simultaneously addressing new challenges and keeping Teach in its worldwide leadership position in the field of autism.
I'm Laura Klinger, and I am the current and third director of the Teach Autism program. Dawn asked me to say a few stories or to share a memory, and that's really hard to choose something short that I could share. I thought about the fact that Gary and I both went to Stanford, and both of us have had many conversations about how we ended up in the field of psychology and how our education pathways ended up with both of us being here at Teach in Chapel Hill. But really the story that I want to tell is a story from when I was here the first time at Teach in 1992 as a psychology intern. It was the year that Gary and Eric switched places. So Gary was the new director of Teach and Eric was the associate director that year. And I had my very first autistic adult client. And in that session, in my sessions with my client, he screamed at me every week. Not Gary, the client. And I tried everything I learned in graduate school about how to be a good therapist and helped my client not to scream at me. And one day Gary said to me, "Did you write him a note?" I said, "Write him a note? Why would I write him a note in the middle of my session?" Gary said, "Write him a note and tell him that he's screaming at you because he may not know what he's doing. And tell him that he's hurt your feelings, because he probably doesn't mean to be hurting your feelings." And I thought, well, okay. So the next week, my client was screaming at me, and I wrote a note, and he said, "Oh my gosh, Laura, I didn't know that I was screaming. I would never want to hurt your feelings." It's such a beautiful example about the importance of understanding the learning styles of autism. And I didn't get it and didn't understand how to work with my clients until I came to Teach and had Gary and Eric as mentors and understanding the learning style. Now, fast forward 18 years later, I was standing at UNC presenting about why I wanted to be the new director of the Teach Autism program, an academic presentation. And in walked that same autistic man in the middle of my presentation. And first of all, I actually totally lost track. If any of you were there, I just totally stopped dead in the middle of my presentation. I was shocked. But it also reminded me about the importance of autism across the lifespan. This was an older adult man who had spent his entire life connected to Teach. I may have gone away, but when I came back, he was still here. Another really good memory about the importance of Teach for individuals with autism from early childhood all the way until older adulthood. Another thing that Gary and Eric and our current Teach colleagues have taught me. So thank you for letting me share that memory, Don.
What you and others in that chapter contributed, I know, is information that most of us are unaware of. And there's just so much in there, that's why I didn't quote from any particular paragraphs. So thank you so much.
Hi, I want to start by thanking, Eric and Miggy, as well as Gary, for building the TEACH program on the concept of respect. You know, and I think about everything that TEACH stands for. It started with the idea of respect for parents as individuals who knew their child well and were great assets to that child's future. Also, the idea of a strength-based approach to working with folks with autism. And Gary then built on that as he talked about the culture of autism and talked about respect for the strengths and for the differences. I think the next step in that thought about building on respect was our respect for our colleagues. And I think the reason why TEACH was so accessible to people in different countries is that we always based everything on that concept of respect and humility, and the idea that there was no one right way, that there are many ways of supporting individuals with autism and their families. And I think that was something I'm very thankful for, because I think that really is the message that we were able to share throughout the world. For me personally, Gary, I want to thank you for being such an amazing mentor to me over the years. And the story I'll share is when I finished my TEACH internship and psychiatry fellowship, child psychology fellowship in psychiatry, I was trying to decide what I was going to do with my life and what my first job or job was going to be. And while there were many people telling me what I should do, Gary, you were the one who said to me, and I don't remember the words used, but basically is, what do you want to do? What feels good to you? And again, that concept, there's no one right way. And because of your encouragement, I took a 1-year temporary position filling in for somebody on sabbatical, which ultimately led to my getting a tenured position in the psychiatry department and coming back to teach not that long after. And I really feel like my 41 years career has really been based on your mentorship from the very beginning. And thank you for that.
My name is Donna Wares. Gary and I were close friends from the time we met in 7th grade all the way through senior year high school. Upon graduation, Gary captured my feelings for our friendship when he wrote in my yearbook, "It's really tough to say goodbye after all these years. It seems that all of my high school memories have you as an important part." The yearbook notes that Gary was voted to the Senior Hall of Fame as most all around, and indeed he was. He was the vice president of the Senior Class Council, a member of the National Honor Society. He played baseball, basketball, football, and was a master at bridge. Gary is such an admirable human being. He has wonderful qualities. We all know of his intelligence, his dedication to others, and his love of family. For me, 2 other traits capture the essence of Gary: his wonderful self-deprecating sense of humor and his modesty. I will cite one example. In our yearbook, we were each asked to state our goal in life. People wrote lawyer, doctor, engineer, get a job, get married. But Gary wrote to meet Willie, referring to his hero, the New York Giants player, Willie Mays. I'm not sure that he ever reached that goal. However, I understand that he accomplished some other small things, like becoming a world-renowned expert on autism. Since graduation, Gary and I have seen each other at class reunions, and I have kept up with his fortunes through conversations with classmates and mutual friends who have shared life's journeys with him. As a brief summary of life after our West Hempstead days, I turn to a memo that Gary wrote for our 35th class reunion. These are Gary's words. I have come to love North Carolina and the life we have here, but I would not have grown up anywhere else in the world except West Hempstead. And I want to thank all of you for your friendship, support, and the invaluable lessons you taught me. Considering what a jerk I was back in those days, I also appreciate that none of you held it against me. Since leaving West Hempstead High School, I have learned it is easier to write popular books on autism than to get a B in high school English. Easier to run a marathon than to win a pickup basketball or baseball game at Chestnut Street School. Easier to become a widely recognized authority than to beat any of you at bridge. And easier to win the respect and esteem of undergraduate and graduate women than to impress a single high school co-ed. I cannot wait to see all of you. Well, Gary, here stands one high school co-ed that you have thoroughly impressed.
I had the biggest and unrequited crush on Gary Mezabov for all the years in high school. I was a cheerleader, and we had cheers where we called out the names of individual players, and Gary was quite the athlete, and I always picked his name. I was sure that I was wearing my heart on the sleeve. I was sure that everybody knew that I was mad for Gary. And when we had our reunion, I can't remember now, it was the 50th or 55th. We had a reunion in Florida several years ago, and I was finally old enough and bold enough to say to Gary, you know, I had the biggest crush on you. And he was like, no way. And that was so typical of Gary, who was extremely modest. To me, it would have been hard to think that he wasn't aware and that everybody around us wasn't aware of this incredible crush. He wasn't much of a dancer, and we would often be at parties and along the sidelines, and we would just be talking and laughing and joking, and like, oh, that would make my evening for me. So that's what I think of, and I really remember not only his incredible sense of humor and humility, but just his general kindness. The fact that he did what he did in his career makes perfect sense to me. It's of a piece of who Gary is. And boy, I am, Gary, sending you this message with much love and admiration. You know, it's really interesting to me, you know, that as an adult, Gary was, you could predict. It was not surprising to, I guess, let me put it this way. It was not surprising to me that he did and accomplished what he did and accomplished, because that was just who he was. He was interviewed, I can't remember now if this was on radio or if this was in Newsday, which was our local paper on Long Island, but somebody was interviewing Gary because of his athletic prowess, and then asking him all kinds of personal questions, and they were asking him about what he liked about girls or specifics about girls, and part of Gary's response, it still cracks me up to this day, was his statement that, you know, I don't like painted women. I think this had to do with makeup. And it was just said with such a kind of offhand modesty and humor. It was absolutely typical of Gary.
Hi, Gary. I'm thinking of you and remembering the brief but very important time that we spent together when we were young. You were such a great role model and influence in my life, and I want to thank you so much for that. And also, I hope you're well, and I want to send you love. I was lucky to have a close friendship with Gary at the end of high school and for a few years after. Aside from being smart, funny, very popular, a great student, and a great athlete, Gary was very kind and very humble. And he was not about being a star, even though he was voted the most all around in our senior class. I believe that Gary is one of the wise. He knew how to turn another person's flaws into something lovable with humor and never a trace of malice. He made me feel very understood at an important time in my life, and lately I've come to realize the influence and inspiration he was. It all started when he invited me to the senior prom, and he had no clue that I was really interested in him as more than a friend. So I had to take matters into my own hands, and a few days after the prom, I called him and asked if I had left my wallet in his car. But I quickly confessed that that was just a ploy to talk to him. And we had a good laugh. And a few days later, Gary called and said he found my wallet. And that was Gary.
My dear Gary, you are always the glue that held the West Hempstead High School class of '63 together. Our all-around classmate, just incredibly kind even as a teen. At the 50th reunion, we spent an afternoon talking about your career and our shared interest in Temple Grandin. He even invited me to North Carolina to hear her speak. And that's my recollection, and it's just lovely. Hugs, Gary. Kathy.
Hi, Gary. Well, it's a wonderful experience being part of this amazing project of your brother. Gary, I was trained by you back in the 80s, so I'm getting old, my grandchildren say, but you're a bit older than I am. But it was a blessing meeting you. You changed my mind forever. You changed what I thought about autism fundamentally. And in a way, I continued through also Theo Peters, which I would like to pay my respect for Theo. Through Theo and you, you changed a lot in Belgium, probably more than you will ever realize, but you laid the foundation of a more autism-friendly culture over here in Belgium. So thank you very much for what you meant, not just to me personally, because we are just tools to create a more autism-friendly world, but to what you did for the autism community in Belgium. And the experience I want to share with you, if you remember, we were together in Kent, the UK, a couple of years ago, and we were talking both about happiness, and only later in life I realized that what Teach was all about was well-being for autistic people. So we were together doing this day in Kent, and I don't know what happened, but it was supposed to be like that, because I wanted to drive back with Ted de Keuclair, who's my wife and who you visited when you came to Belgium in the 80s. You stayed at her place, and she stayed at your place when she came over to the United States. So that came along with me to Kent, and we were driving our car because that's possible going from the continent to the UK, and there was a fire in the tunnel underneath the channel, so we couldn't go back home. And you got stuck because I don't remember, because of a strike of trains, anything like that. Both of us were stuck in the middle of nowhere in Kent. So what did we do? We went to a pub. That's what old men do when they have an evening free. So we sat there and we talked about the old days. Like, I always say it like maybe the two grumpy old men of the Muppet Show, that was us. and you told stories about actually that Teach was all about happiness and well-being. And, you know, Gary, again, it was a blessing meeting you. And we shared this common experience. And you told Dan the story about Cheers. You know, the comedy series that almost nobody remembers anymore, except if they have the color of hair that I have now. But you said, Cheers, you would like the world to be one big cheers for autistic people. And that's a place where nobody's perfect, where imperfections are not yet diagnosed according to some big fat manual, but where everybody is respected for what they are and who they are, and where the first names are more important than labels, diagnostic labels. Gary, I wish you for the rest of your life a cheers. That's what I wish to you. Thank you very much for everything you did.
Thank you so much, Peter. And by the way, the picture in the book that I love the best, partly because of its quality and partly because of just its human interest, is the picture of your wife with the cat. In fact, I look at that and I swear it looks like a raccoon. Which
it is like a raccoon.
But that's why I felt the need of a caption to specify.
I always say it's our little gremlin, but it's a dog.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm going to switch to Mary Beth now, and you can either stay on or go off, and but either way, we'll be done in about 5 or 10 minutes. And
okay,
I hope to get over to Europe. Susan and I want to get over to Europe hopefully this spring, and if we do, I'd love to get together with you.
You're welcome for a beer.
Oh, we'll be right there.
Okay.
Thanks.
Hi, Uncle Gary. I want to thank you for the patience and calming demeanor that you always carry. From just sitting around and chatting to enjoying time with my kids and time with your grandchildren in an apple orchard. You're always smiling and going with the flow. You have always cared more about what others have to say than by saying what you're trying to say. I strive to be more like you during conversations. It takes some patience, though, for sure. Lastly, thank you for answering all my questions around autism as I was a new mother. You always satisfied my curiosity without making me feel embarrassed at all about asking the questions. It never felt like I was bothering you. You've made a huge impact on this world, and I'm very grateful to have benefited from all your wisdom. We all love you. Bye, Uncle Gary.
Vivian has come from Brazil.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here. I learned about Teach with Schotter and Nezibov in so many trainings here at UNC. And I am applying all the principles of the Teach in Brazil with autistic children and our families since I think about 25, 30 years, and have helping so many families and so many children with autism. The idea of the culture of autism building by Eric Schotter and Gary Mesibov changed the concept of the autism in the world. And I'm so happy to have been taught by you, Dr. Mesibov, I wish you all the best. Thank you.
I want to just close with what I think is appropriate, chapter 18, the legacy. And I tried to capture the scope, which I think we've also captured today, the scope of your reach, Teach's reach, Eric and Gary's, by capturing quotes from as many different people in different places as possible. So, Joaquin Fuentes in Spain, excuse me, Teach has had an impact on millions of families, and I mean millions. Corey Schulman, Israel. Because of Teach, training and intervention delivery all over the world has changed. Ken Poon, Singapore. Gary is undoubtedly one of the giants who shaped how we serve individuals with autism in Singapore. Katie Bozarth, United States. The principles I've learned from Teach have absolutely shaped me into the educator and coach I am today. Tom Shopler. Dr. Sasaki in Japan tried to get Eric nominated for a Nobel Prize for his work on autism. The Japanese felt so strongly about his work there. And Viviane de Leon, Brazil. Eric and Gary were respectful of everyone. They taught us to respect people with ASD, and they helped us understand how to improve their quality of life. As I said at the beginning, this is one of the most exciting, maybe the most exciting days that I've had in my lifetime outside of my family, marriage, births, and so forth. And I just want to conclude saying, and I'll remember not to step away from the podium, I can do it right once. One of the things that a lot of us have problems with, and you see some people more problems than others, is it's very easy to feel unimportant in this world. You hear about billions of people, you see so many people around you, and you see people who don't vote, and they say, see, my candidate won by more than one vote, so it wouldn't have mattered if that I didn't vote. But it's almost like a plague, and it's so unfortunate that people feel unimportant. And as I've had the privilege of talking with so many of you and learning so much about my brother, I think of what a colleague would say, which is, this book and your efforts with Teach would be diminished to some point if any one of you were not involved. And I really believe that. And I think it's important that we believe it because, as you know, it's collective action that brings about the biggest changes and results. And certainly I don't know any other group of people or organization that has accomplished as much in the time that you've been working together and have left a legacy where it's clear now that you're as strong today as Teach ever was, which means that what you've accomplished is going to continue, and that may be the biggest tribute to all of you. So I thank you very much for the privilege of working with you, and we really do hope to get around to see all of you in your home areas. Thank you.
I'm a parent, and I am the founder of MAP Services for Autism, which represented high-functioning people on the spectrum before they were very widely recognized. What I think the greatest gifts that Gary gave me and many other parents was validation and respect. And I can still remember he had been in a talk that I gave in Georgia and heard me. It was very memorable in my mind because I had fallen off the podium in front of 600 people. So it was kind of a memorable time of humiliation in my life. And so here I am in this little town. I lived in Crown Point, Susan Moreno? And I said, yes. And he said, well, this is Dr. Gary Mezimov. And I figured it was one of I had 3 best friends, and we all had kids on the spectrum, and we were big practical jokers, so I figured it had to be the husband of my friend Gary. And so I said, oh, really, Gary? Yes. I mean, for me, this is like a very, supposedly this icon of mine is calling me in Crown Point. And I said, so I started calling him Gary Sweetie Baby, because I figured it really wasn't me. And it was showing classic disrespect, which I was kind of known for. So I just thought, okay, I'll get it, my friends. So I said, well, sure, Gary Sweetie Baby, what do you want? Okay, now I know it's a joke. And I said, oh, really? And he said, yes, and we write a book after each conference, and you would be doing a chapter in the book. And I said, sure, honey, whatever you want. And I said, anything else I can do for you? And I had never told a lot of my friends about what happened to me in Atlanta, Georgia, falling off the podium. And Gary said, well, I hope you won't fall off the podium. And then I realized it really was Dr. Gary Mezimov. I could say, Dr. Mezimov, sir, I'm so embarrassed to say that. But when I got there, I was very frightened to stay to teach. And he had not, I don't think, gotten agreement from Eric when I gave invited. I had no PhD. At that time, I just didn't get to talk and teach. But we didn't have a PhD. And so I'm scared to death. Eric had gotten up and introduced the speakers and did not mention me. So I'm thinking, okay, I don't belong here. I'm scared. What am I doing? And so Gary, being the kind man that he was, came out and said, so now, don't you worry. Everything's going to be just fine. I'm very excited about you talking. And I just had flops lit. And I was just scared to death. And he said, don't worry. I checked the podium. You can't possibly fall off. One of the other 2 speakers, Kathy Lord was one. The other was Dr. Lorna Wing, who was a parent, and she wrote the first book that I could understand about autism. And she was quite elderly by that time, and as she was finishing her talk, she fell off the podium. There were like over 800 people there. Went, oh, and Gary Mezimov and I went, ha! Such a gentleman, he's so kind. He was running to help her and trying not to have any kind of a grin on his face. And at the dinner that night, Dr. Wing, of course, was not speaking to me. So I told her back the story of why he did not laugh. And she turned around and said, it was the funniest thing she ever heard. It was very nice and very accommodating. But I think for many of us parents, for Gary to respect us to that point and give us a voice was unheard of in that era. And that would went back to 1988 for me. So I feel older than dirt, but I feel so honored to know Gary, to know Kathy Lord, and to know the Teach methods and the Teach legacy. It's changed the world. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you so much. Well, you're on.
Hi everybody. Thank you so much, Don. It was so good to talk to you because you look so similar to Gary. And you have the same kindness as Gary. So it was so good talking to you on Zoom. It feels so good to hear all of you sharing memories, Gary and Eric, and also to see all the old Teach faces. So I really enjoyed this evening. And as most of you are owed so much to Gary and to the Teach community, I was a very young psychologist when I met Gary and the team with Cassie, Kaya, Sarah. It's like 36 years ago. And I was always impressed by Gary's never-ending curiosity and his way to explain autism, like really from the inside, and also his talent to share his passion and his respect for the culture of autism. I think that back to the years I met Gary and his colleagues for the first time, only a very open-minded and curious person. I could enjoy coming to Paris every year to the training. It was really in a period when France was in the middle age of autism, and we were really in the psychoanalytic period and talking about education and educating children with autism was like animal dressing, so you really had to be very passionate to come over and give these trainings year after year. So I'm very lucky, and I feel very fortunate to meet Gary at this point of my career, really in the beginning. But I also spent a lot of hours in Chapel Hill, and it was really always a fun time. And I even got to share the car and the ice cream with Jamie Baby, Gary's boxer. He was so excited, enthusiastic to spend time with his dog, and I think for him it was really very important that we got to know his dog. Just thinking about him and about Jamie Baby. And I feel so fortunate to be a small part of the International Teach family for so many years now. So thank you to all of you, and thank you, Don.
My name is Anna and I'm from Germany. I'm here today because Teach has been part of my life for over 32 years now, and the truth is I would not be who I am and where I am today if it were not for Teach, and for Gary, that is, who never was too busy to respond to my letters or emails. My first contact was with Eric, whom I contacted as a graduate student from Germany to inquire about professional hands-on training in the field of autism. Eric invited me to come as an intern, and when I arrived in August 1990, he welcomed me into his office. He proudly tried his German on me, to which I politely responded, smiling, not understanding a word he was saying. Because, well, he came from Bavaria, and they speak a dialect nobody from Germany really understands. So I spent 2 years at the Asheville Teach Center, where I fell in love with Teach and the mountains at the same time. I keep coming back to the mountains, and whenever I drive through western North Carolina, this is horrible. Whenever I drive through western North Carolina, names of the places trigger the names of my former colleagues with whom I traveled there for consultation. I didn't know that was happening to me. Brevard and Boone are associated with Anne McGuire, and Hickory with John Thomas, Waynesville with Galene Fraley, and Hendersonville with Amy Hobbs. West Asheville reminds me of Ron Larson, with whom I there had the preschool group. And I remember accompanying Catherine Fairity to presentation of her Understanding Friends program in Asheville. And then there was the conference center. Oh God, this is horrible. I read it all down so that I wouldn't screw up, you know, and now this happens to me. Then there was the conference room at our center, which also is the location that I remember well, and listening to Roger Cox talk to parents during interpretive conferences after an evaluation of their child was an invaluable training of respectfulness and caring. When I moved to Chapel Hill to attend graduate school in 1992, Gary was aware of that. And he made sure I had a place to go the first Thanksgiving that I was here. He invited me to dinner, and I really enjoyed that. I felt honored that Gary served on my doctoral committee and continued to provide support and advice for years to come. It is difficult to put into words what I feel, and Don asked to keep it short, so I will not even try and say from the bottom of my heart just thank you.
Hi, I'm Lori Ireland, and I'm the parent of a now 32-year-old gentleman on the spectrum. And this is the legacy of Gary and Eric, in the sense that a few years ago I was invited to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as in my role in the Autism Society of America, because they were looking for some consulting help. And it was absolutely amazing. When I just looked at this orange piece of paper, I never knew the part about the King of Saudi Arabia, but I can remember being in wonder, going around these different schools and workplaces and all that, and seeing all those teach icons everywhere in Riyadh. So that speaks a lot to sort of the globalization of teach. And in addition, I want to do a shout out, because a lot of us knew each other because of teach. And it goes on and on. I mean, sitting in the audience today is Alice Wertheimer, who was one of the other founders of Extraordinary Adventures, where we sit, and also Dr. Klinger, who's on the board of Extraordinary Adventures. So it just goes on, and I think that speaks volumes to the impact they've had on the world of autism. Thank you very much.
Lori, thank you. And just looking around this room and the fact that you helped to create this is another example, as I said, that it's always been parents who led the charge to do something about autism.
I'm Gary and Don's cousin, so I've been lucky enough to have them in my life for my whole life. I have a different link to teach, which is I'm so grateful to teach because Gary used to come to England once or twice a year, and when he'd come to work here, he'd come visit myself and my family, which for us was a great treat. When he'd come, we didn't talk much about work, and we're in similar fields, but we talk about our families. And that's why, for me, it's absolutely wonderful to hear all of you in your tributes to him, and hear more about Teach, and have the book that Don's written. And I just thank you all, and of course, I thank Gary for all the warmth and love he's given to my family.
Hi everybody, I'm Kathy Lord. It's so nice to see some of you, or all of you, but some of you who I know. I think I just want to say that knowing Gary and Eric really, and Teach, just changed my life completely. And I think, as Andy Short said, Eric brought in parents, and parents were people. And, you know, the general attitude of Teach of we're working together, you know, which Alice talked about as belonging, I think just totally shifted the way that I had been taught as a professional, and coming from very strict behaviorism to psychodynamics in Boston, and then to Teach, it was just such a radical different approach. And then I think what Gary did was also bring in the notion that autistic
kids and then adults are people too. And these are people that we can have groups with and we can have fun with, and but we also need to help them get started and get jobs and find places to live. And that was so manifested in everything that Gary did, from the Thanksgiving dinners with people from the autism social groups to the employment programs to, I still remember him with one of my first patients when I was an intern, asking her, well, what did she think was good about her? And this was a teenage girl, and she said, my feet. I have really small feet. And I was like, oh my goodness, where are we going with this? And then the girl was having a lot of tension with her mother, where her mother felt like she wasn't doing things, that were going to allow her to express her intelligence, which was high. And here we are talking about feet, but we just shifted and tried to figure out what could we do that would help this young woman feel proud of herself. It was long before trainers became a major issue, but just how can we help her feel proud of her feet and then move forward. And I remember at one point I said, gosh, Gary, shouldn't we be keeping track of goals and progress? And he was like, Kathy, do you want to be a police officer or do you want to help people? And I think that attitude, and then also being able to see Todd and Brian grow up, and the contrast also between Gary and Eric were such different people, but they did make the same assumptions, I think, about all of us and autistic people and their families, which is we need to work together. And somehow that gets lost, you guys, in so much of what goes on today in terms of looking for quick answers to things, and I think it's just stayed with me. So I am just so grateful that I got to know Gary and Lori and Eric and Nikki and the kids who are no longer kids, and the rest of many of you. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I really appreciate that. You were one of the first ones I talked with who set me on this journey. I also want to recognize my wife, Susan, and I can honestly say without her support, the book wouldn't be here, because we'd have breakfast together, and then I would disappear until it was time to watch some of the British mysteries on TV after dinner. And that gave me the time to communicate with all of you and write this.
I'm really interested in sharing two stories about Gary and Eric, both because I think they really reflect how amazingly creative they both were in their thinking, but maybe even more importantly, how they influence the way that we all think about autism and deal with it today. They were definitely ahead of their times, and thank goodness they were, because their visions helped us continue to develop some of the things that we learned from them. I'll start with a visit to North Carolina to come in for one of the teach trainings, which is, I think, the first time I actually met Gary. Lee Marcus had been in Israel, and we had worked together, and he felt it would be a very good idea if I came to North Carolina and actually got the teach training very, very systematically. So I came, and Lee introduced me to Gary, and we just really set it on. It was a beautiful relationship. I can't say more than that. But at one point, Gary started talking about the culture of autism, which was something that I didn't really know what it meant. And as he explained the fact that people with autism do have their own ways of doing things, which are really appropriate for them. And in addition to people who work with people with autism, having to help them adjust to the more neurotypical world, Gary also explained very clearly that we, as people in the neurotypical world, could also do some appropriate changing of our world to make it more available to the people with autism. And I remember going up to him after that lecture and explaining to him that when I first moved to Israel, it was really a culture shock for me. And one of the things that I found very different was that people's personal space was very different than what I was used to coming from the United States. And I used to bump into people on the street. And Gary thought that was an absolute riot, and he actually used that example later in some of his discussions about the culture of autism. And he said, you know, even people who don't have autism don't follow the same rules. And so that people can bump into each other. And he said that he used that as an analogy for the fact that sometimes people with autism just bumped into people without autism because they weren't following the same personal spaces, understanding of what people need. And I felt that that was just such a beautiful thing for an acknowledgement of the fact that we're not really talking about something that isn't part of the human condition. And accepting that diversity probably makes us all better people. And I learned that from Gary. The second story that I want to share is a story of when I came a different trip to North Carolina, and Lee and Gary and I went to have dinner with Eric in his beautiful home in the woods. And Eric said to me, so is there anything we have to know about your eating preferences? And I said to him that it's really not a problem because I'm a vegetarian and I just won't eat anything cooked because that'll make it easier for me. As we were walking out to the beautiful home, Gary said to me, you know, I'm not quite sure what that means, but I can tell you that those were very clear instructions. That that's the way we need to talk to people with autism so that there won't be misunderstandings. And I said to him that, you know, one of the things that has been very wonderful for me in working with people is that they've helped me to be much clearer in my messages and what I tell people and how I say it. And when we walked in, there was cooked vegetarian food on the table. So after we all had a very good laugh about that, Gary said, but I thought she was so clear. And Eric said, well, she was, and we have 4 different salads, but we wanted her to know that if she wanted to have something cooked, there was also vegetarian food that was cooked. And once again, a wonderful message of being accepting of everyone's differences and understanding that when one works with people with autism, one does not just help them, but that we all become better people for having had contact with people who make us even better than we could be without that meeting. And it was a real pleasure to be able to learn and grow and have a good time, both with Gary and Lee and Eric, mostly with Teach. Thank you.
everyone. I am a parent of a person on the autism spectrum. I am also, just by sheer dumb luck, I wound up being on the staff at Teach for a number of years. A truly great experience. What I want to say is really nothing that I can share here right now, but I want to send a message to Gary at a time in my life when things were really bad and external events made them quite a bit worse. I really appreciate the way that you stood by me and stood up for me. I will never, ever forget that. Thank you very much. And as for you, Don, the 83 messages that I allegedly sent to you, you must have lost 7, man, because I counted 90.
Well, I've come to appreciate them because I've used them all. The truth is, I probably erased some as I was swearing the moment I saw how many there were. But no,
I bet you were.
You're an invaluable resource. And incidentally, one of the things I didn't read, but is Eric's description of the cow puzzle, where he demonstrated the difference in the way people with autism, well, the basics of it was that people who don't have autism need the picture of a puzzle to work it out, but that people with autism, when he scrambled the pieces, could figure out the puzzle by looking at the pieces and what fit. And I said to myself when I read that, if I ever had a sore puzzle and I didn't have a picture on the cover to work from, that would be the end of it with me. But anyway, you might find that interesting, the cow puzzle, and that's along with many things, thanks to Brenda. Sally, you're on.
Last time I saw Gary, I think it's been at least 16 years now. The last time I saw him, it was in Montreal. He came up here to give a conference, and it was an honor to receive him. And it was an amazing moment because our French community had the opportunity to listen to this amazing man presenting a lot of critical strategies about them. And then it's a nice moment that we share and that a lot of people here remember. So I want to thank everybody of each community for all the work that you have done. And I am glad now to contribute to this work now with my colleagues here in Montreal, Quebec. It's an honor for me to be part of this group. And just like Gary, Gary was a person that we never forget. And a lot of the Teach community member and family are also persons that we never forget. So thank you all, and thank you, Don, for this, all this good memories that we were had bring to us.
Well, it's an honor to be able to make a statement about Gary. Gary is a tremendous individual, professionally and personally, a hero to me in my life. And I'd like to explain why a lawyer and law professor had a connection with Gary, because I know most of the people who did were involved in the area of autism and teach and education of people on the spectrum. I do have a son on the autism spectrum. He was a number of years ago brought within the criminal justice system for having illegal images on his computer. I was shocked at the time. I didn't know of anyone else who had gone through this. But what I found out is that there were a number of leading world-renowned experts throughout the country who were very concerned about people with autism who were facing the similar charges that were very serious, could involve prison for people who are the most unlikely types to hurt anyone, non-contact type crimes. I found an article that Gary wrote in 2009, way ahead of his time with these other world-renowned experts, and I want to just briefly read this because I'd like all of the other autism experts who have spoken about Gary to be educated on this particular issue and help people with autism who are charged with crimes. Gary said this: persons with autism or on the autism spectrum often get into trouble without even realizing that they have committed an offense such as stalking, and inappropriate touching, sexual, child pornography, crimes of that nature. And he said that he felt that lawyers who operate the criminal justice system don't understand the issues that challenge people on the spectrum, including sensory overload, poor social awareness, lack of sexual experience, and ease of acquiring pornography at no cost on a computer, with no safeguards or warnings provided. And based upon that, Gary and I kind of hooked up and saw that we had this common interest because Gary had been an expert witness in many cases to help people with autism. As a result of that, Gary and I worked on some conferences together to help parents understand people with autism and issues of sexuality and getting into the criminal justice system that parents needed to know about, psychologists needed to know about, educators needed to know about. So Gary and I became friends. He has been to my house, very supportive of my son and what he has gone through. Gary wrote a chapter in a book that I also wrote called Caught in the Web of the Criminal Justice System regarding this issue. I cannot think of anyone more devoted to people with autism as Gary. He truly is a hero and a champion to those of us who have had autism in our family. I wish him the best and thank Don for the opportunity to speak these words.
I just want to share that I believe the sentiment I'm hearing is that this is a story of a group of people that we roar about every day. Our narrative and our ability to tell these stories will never end. We will all be recruiting other people that will follow us and be interested and help out this. Gary and Teach have been instrumental in our lives here. Our son learned from their team up in Detroit, a 4-week project. He learned how to use a vending machine. And I still have a big jar of coins that I can use to give my son some money for a vending machine. He's 39. And I also learned from Gary that we need to make sure that we have open opportunities for whether you're autistic or not, or you're typical, or you have any condition in life, that you're receiving and getting safe contacts with law enforcement and public safety professionals along with fair rules, so that the criminal justice playing field is level. So we need to keep working at it, but God bless everybody here on Zoom land and in North Carolina today. Gary, Eric, and thank you, God, for making this happen.
Thank you, Dennis. Okay, David Moser.
It's been a good opportunity to speak. Everybody, it's lots of good memories for me. Yeah. And I wanted to mention something that Gary left us a living legacy that is carried through to this day. He developed, when I came down to teach, a series of social groups. I didn't as a place for me to have some friends that I've been called to have known for almost 30 years, 5 years at least. That would be John Guy, Scott Woolridge, and Paul Off. And he's from, along with Patrick Perry, they're now in my supper club tonight. Supper club. I was supposed to go to a supper club on Monday with everyone, but of course I broke my arm, so I am here and not where you guys are. My parents' house recuperating many of my bones. But these guys, I have followed thick and thin through their careers, through their work, through our friendships and our mutual, situations that are living on the spectrum. And they were the greatest treasure, along with some other of my friends too, in our supper club, that Gary gave me entree to. And I just, it's really been a blessing to me in my life to be able to call them friends. And the other thing I like about Gary is that he's been a mentor and a big influence for me in my work at Teach. I'm an accounting technician, and I work in the accounting section of the department, or I still do, 27 years. And I was able to ask, let's talk with Gary about some of the things around the office and what would we do, and how we would handle the situation, say with another person or colleague or supervisor. His advice was always spot on, and I count him actually as one of the people most important for keeping me in my job at Teach all these years. Because again, he was just dropped in as a friend and gave me some great advice, and then take off and leave off as if nothing had happened. We could always say hi to each other in the hall. He would ask me a few things with how my parents were doing, and how the Tar Heels were doing. Both were big UFC football and basketball fans. Now I just felt like there was a certain intimacy with him that I would have never otherwise gotten in any other workplace, or for that matter, in academia. I've been either. So I just want to say thank you, Gary, for giving me a circle of friends and a level of trust to be able to go out on them in terms of making new friends, but keeping the ones that I have. Gladys Williams, our proctor, is another legacy of Gary's too. And I count her a friend as well, a former director of CLFC, Teach colleague upstairs in Chapel Hill. I'm just truly grateful for all of the personal riches that Gary has endowed me with over the years. Oh, by the way, Lori, I just want to say bye and thank you again for being one of the many interns to help our group grow and develop into the people that we are. And I really enjoyed meeting you back in, I think it was 2008, 2007, magical summer for me, or 6, that was 2006, where things really took off. And I just want to say thank you. I'm just truly grateful.
Lori Sperry.
Go ahead, Lori.
Well, many people have talked about the culture of kindness that was established at Teach. And I think about the extraordinary people that I've worked with at Teach, as well as those of you I got to know after my time at Teach. And I think the culture that was established by both Eric and Gary helped us as leaders to then cultivate that in our own organizations. And I think about the concentric circles of their influence in our lives. Gary was always such an amazing mentor to me that when I had my own graduate students as a professor, he said to me, "That feels like they're my grandchildren. Since you were one of my graduate students, your graduate students are now my grandchildren." And, so here we are 35 years later. Gary has been an enormous influence on my life. I am eternally grateful for the professional that he developed me into. And dry sense of humor. Todd, if you're there, I will tell you I one time caught your father wearing a Duke sweatshirt. And it was about 5 in the morning, and we were both out for a run, and he was coming one way and I was going the other, and I said, "What are you wearing?" And he went, "Oh, don't tell anyone." And so, sorry, Mary, but I had to betray your confidence after all these years. Thank you for all you've meant to all of us.
Andy, hello. Nice to meet you. Good.
Hello, I'm Andy Short. I guess Gary knows that. I don't have any funny stories, but I did want to. Oh, I don't have my head cut off. That was
microphone closer to mouth.
Okay. At any rate, I just wanted to say a few words about Eric, and then actually somebody else and Gary. So Eric, you know, I'm sure people are saying a lot of things about Eric. What I would say about Eric was that he was an extraordinary out-of-the-box thinker. I don't know how many folks are aware, but when he started this whole idea of like parents as collaborators, parents as partners and working with their own kids, that was totally against everything that was happening in psychiatry and clinical psychology at the time. It was really revolutionary. Now it's becoming some orthodoxy in many areas. I'm doing a lot of work in disaster, and we rely a lot on trauma-informed approaches. And one of the core principles of trauma-informed care is collaborating with people, treating clients, treating people you're working with as equals and as partners in a relationship in their own treatment. So Eric, needless to say, was way ahead of his time. I do want to mention Miggy because I think Miggy actually was kind of the start of the teach approach to working with kids with autism. She was the one who had the intuition and the ability to work with kids. She started the whole idea of structured teaching and working with kids at their, figuring out what their developmental level was and working from there. And of course, Miggy was very important to me. I love Miggy, and so I wanted to mention her. Gary, you're the best. I'm sure people have talked about how brilliant you are and all the things you did. I guess what I think of Gary as being really extraordinary at is he just had a calm approach. He oversaw, he understood everything that was going on, and he was incredible at getting the best out of everyone who worked in the TEACH program. Which is an extraordinarily talented group of people. So that was, to me, I mean, a lot of people would mention certainly his pioneering work in social skills training and work with adolescents and adults. I think Laura was talking about that when I came in. But I think Gary's ability to get the best out of everyone is the thing that strikes me the most. Thanks.
Alice Wertheimer has also been a terrific source of information for me. And between you and Brenda, I think I have the whole history of teaching even before it.
I'm a big follower of a woman in social work named Brene Brown, and she talks a lot about belonging and how it is our human need. It's like a primal need to belong to a group. And I've really spent a lot of time thinking about this in the context of Teach and of Gary and of Eric and of me. And experience with them and with Teach, and it's all about belonging. And it's belonging, in my view, as a parent of a child with autism, and a kind of unique perspective, especially back in 1992, as a parent and a person on the staff at Teach. And I think this, this thoughts about this started to click for me. So Brene Brown says that belonging is being somewhere where you want to be, and they want you. Belonging is being accepted for you. Fitting in is being accepted for being like everyone else. And isn't that the heart of the Teach approach to autism, right? So everything Laura and all of you have said, and how Teach continues to work, is about belonging, about accepting you for you. And it's not about, as I came to know after my work with Teach, when I had wonderful job experiences and wonderful people to work with and really felt productive and really felt like part of a group. But I fit in. I fit in really well. I made myself valuable and I made myself one of them so that I could fit in. But I never really belonged like I did to Teach and like I did to all of you and I did with Eric and with Gary. So I think that has, that sort of recognition and revelation in my mind has really been key and really important to me to really kind of come to terms with a lot of years in my life and a lot of the feelings I have about my work at Teach and about who I am and why that is so important to me. You know, Eric and my father-in-law were very similar peas in a pod, and when I came to be employed at Teach because Gary wanted a parent answering the phones, he wanted the first person that people who called in spoke to be a parent. And I was the first person to do that. And I was the switchboard operator. And Eric came to me one day and said, Valtimer, he said, he asked about my family. And it ended up that he was very, very similar genre to my father-in-law. And they reminded me very much of each other. And one day he called me into his office, and I can just see, you all remember if you were there, being in his office with that owl staring down at us. And he wanted to know my father-in-law's story, which I told him, which was a very, very similar story. And he said to me, well, did you know that I saved Henry Kissinger from the Nazis? And I said, no, I didn't know that. Thanks a lot. And he said, do you know this story, Shopper family? Well, it's like legendary in my family. That,
not from your point of view.
Pardon?
We don't know it from your point of view.
Oh, well, I got it from your dad, and he said that his family, Eric's family, were at the visa office. They had finally obtained visas in the 30s to leave Germany. The handwriting was on the wall, and they were leaving, and they were friendly in their community with the Kissingers, and they were also leaving that day. They were at the office to get their visa, and Eric was a little boy, of course, and just as the name was being called, your grandparents were working with the paperwork, and the Kissingers were called. And just then, little Henry had wandered off, and Mrs. Kissinger freaked out, I guess, and said to the Shopler grandmother, tell Eric to get Henry. And Eric started looking for Henry, but he had to be at these, German officials needed that family standing in front of them right then. And so Eric was told, stand there and say you're Henry. And so Eric literally stood in for Henry Kissinger when he was 6, 7, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 years old. That's the story I knew. And Gary, I just have to say one story that really, really relates to what you said about traveling. Gary was so great at giving opportunities. I mean, one after another, year after year, he'd say, you'd be really good at this, you should do this, you'd be perfect, you're perfect for this, you can do it, this is great, you could, and he would move me into some other role or ask me to do something a step above what I thought I should be doing, and he was so good, but it wasn't just me, it was everyone. Everyone was great and could do it and was giving confidence. And one time he said, I told him that I know he had been invited to go to Amsterdam to give a talk to a parents group where we really had never had any contact. And it was my dream. I had lived there for a while. I wanted to go back. I wanted so much to see the autism world in Holland. And I said to Gary, would you like someone to carry your stuff with you when you go? And he said, no, but I would like you to give a talk as a parent. And he arranged for me to go with him, and it was wonderful. But one of the most amazing things about the experience was traveling with Gary, because it was phenomenal to see the kind of respect and esteem and how much he was liked all over in the airport, from the porters to the men who drive the little bus to the flight attendants. It was all Dr. Nezabov, everyone, the people in the cafe where he got his coffee at the airport, at both ends, in London and in RDU. I mean, no one was bowing or kissing his hand, but they all were so happy to see him. And they knew him by name, and they greeted him. And I thought, my God, this man walks around Chapel Hill all the time, and nobody gives him the time of day. And he's so well honored here. And Gary, thank you for all the opportunities to me, to my family, and for being who you were and making us all feel like we belonged. The expression of love between brothers is so remarkable, and such a tribute to you, Don, and to Gary, and to your family, Gail, and all of you, that it's astounding. I don't have words to say how touched we all are by your tribute and devotion to your brother, and the commitment to see that this unbelievable story that was so understated by both Gary and Eric, all their careers, is being brought to the fore thanks to your remarkable efforts, and we're all incredibly grateful to you. I know, it was a very emotional and sometimes difficult journey for me, but I'm personally grateful to you for letting me get that all out and straight in my head, and the tribute to your brother will live on forever, so thank you.
I'm Joanne Quinn. I'm a parent of a 27-year-old young man with autism, and I first encountered Teach in 1999 when he was diagnosed. My dad and I flew on a plane down to North Carolina because it was the only place that had anything even remotely for parent education. And I want to add to what everybody else has said, with the pushback and questions we get from so many people about why would you have parents in that training too? Isn't it just for professionals? And the thing I love about Teach is you empower the parents, and we continue to empower the parents with the knowledge that we've gained. And I'm so lucky to be working with so many parents and professionals who work together as a unique collaboration, as our mission says, that we have everybody in the room, because you get different viewpoints and you learn information. And as a parent, to be able to have strategies and skills myself that someone has taught me so I can help my son be his best person is really amazing. And it breaks my heart when I hear somebody say, well, his work is going to be here at 3, I think she can help him with that. And we really invite them in and say, well, come here, let's tell you a couple things that you might be able to do. And it's being validated by the phone calls we're getting now of parents of young adults and adults who still struggle. And it's nobody's fault. It is what it is in the numbers, and we just want to continue to help. And I think our passion for that, or even our confidence to do that, came from Eric and Gary. To say, no, we leave all our degrees at the door, and then we go in there as a collaboration, and we bring our best to the situation to help the person we're helping. And that is so unique and refreshing. Especially my Aunt Betty had my cousin Bennett, who's the same age as I am, I'm 61, and she was a refrigerator mama. That's how she was referred to. Isn't she crazy? She cuts his sandwiches in circles every day. Why does she cut his sandwiches in circles? Because that's the only way Bennett will eat it, you know? So I think that is the true legacy of Teach, and the independence and the doability of it out in public, you know, in a classroom, in a dentist's office, anywhere. It's just universal language and respect. And the culture of autism brought up at its best by the two of them, and everybody at Teach. I am forever grateful and so glad that I'm part of the team here in Rhode Island. And they, poor Gary made eye contact with, Lori had to get off, but he made eye contact with a few of Pat's teachers who were down there early on. And they called him every week, and he took their phone calls, and they developed a lot of information, opportunities here for other teachers and parents in Rhode Island. So as a parent and now professional working with them, I'm truly grateful of their legacy. And I hope my brother and sister at least write a nice memorial about me, because Don, this is an amazing tribute to your brother, and so well deserved it. It's really a wonderful day, and thanks for having us be a part of it.
Thank you so much, Joanna.
I'm Tomoko from Japan. I had an internship at it was in 92, almost right before Anna was leaving us to go to Chatham Hill, so we studied together. We sat next to each other in our office in National Kids Center. And I had an internship and scholarship to spend a year and teach from Asahi Shimbun, and then they made a contract with Eric and Gary. So Eric one time invited me to his house in Cary, and he showed me a huge orchard, and he gave me a small pot that he made by an artist he was supporting on his property. I still keep it, very small. And it's on my shelf. And what I learned from Eric was value is different in each other. So play is work and work is play. Was such impact to me. It was almost changing my world, and that is the perspective of the children with autism. So I always keep difference. So that is still in my mind. So both two are huge mentor and huge stars in my life. And I traveled all of the teach centers in the state while I'm staying here, and I wanted to learn how the social system works for people with autism and their families in the North Carolina. So I learned it from my perspective, and I went back to Japan. I tried to create something, establish something like that. So now my prefecture, called Saga Prefecture, became North Carolina in Japan. People said that. So still now, it's been almost more than 30 years. The Parents Association said 5 or 6 families are moving into Saga every year now. That was when I was here in 92. Families are moving into North Carolina from outside of the North Carolina. So now it's happening in Saga, Japan. Gary and Eric, I invited both. Gary came to Saga Prefecture, I believe 10 times, more than 10 times. But I invited both together in, I think that was 2005 or something. And then I asked both of them to meet the governor of Saga Prefecture, how to establish a better system to make change in Saga Prefecture. And our governor was so into it, and also he listened to both of them talking, and also he made a difference in Saga system. Kay was the interpreter during the meeting. That was an epoch-making time, an opportunity for the Saga people. And Gary brought me a music tape. I think all of you know that. James Taylor's North Carolina in my mind. He gave it to me, and you have this for Saga Prefecture. That was a so good memory. Thank you.
Okay, let me just add one thing while Tomoko was on, and that is, she told me that in Japan you called him Typhoon Gary because he would arrive in August at about the same time as the first typhoon of the year.
I will start with the sheer fact that I had the privilege of coming into the Teach family when I was just an undergraduate studying at a Carolina school and just met up with some great professors. And I'll say that Gary and Eric were influencers before influencers were cool, right? Like we have all these people that have these job professions now and their title is influencers, so I think I would give them that title. And one thing I truly believe I'm walking away from in that experience, prior to even being licensed as an educator, and I work now as an educational consultant, yet Gary and Eric gave me a true understanding that everyone has a right to be independent. And Teach gave that opportunity to so many families, so many kids, so many individuals. I just listened to families talk about the influence that Teach had on their family, and it gave their kid a chance to structure, gave their kid a chance to understand that as a person, you belong here. And I think that I am forever grateful for that. I will always say that it goes back to those early influential years when you don't know what you don't know and you're starting out in a career, and now having the opportunity and the courage to partner with families as an educator and really challenge that status quo and say that everyone belongs to the table, and I'm really thankful for that. So truly a pleasure to be a part of all of this in this community, and being in a room with some amazing legacy people. Like, this is a little starstruck for me personally, so thank you all for everything you're doing.
I've asked Lee Marcus to come up, and you can also say something if you want, Lee. But in the book, I quote Lee as talking about going with Gary to the Sienna Hotel and sharing a scotch as you did some planning, and you added in moderation. So I brought something special for you, Lee, and because Lee's the only one who told the story, he's the only one who's going to get this. But I would like to share a little bit of scotch with you.
You gave yourself more.
And you can take, well, I'm going to give Lee the bottle, so he can take this with him. So, thank you. I don't know if you want to say anything. If you do,
no, I'll just drink the scotch first. It might take a while to finish.
You know, it took me 83 interviews, and I didn't find out till now what made teach work.
Scott?
Not bad.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I shop your table. I left my notes at the table. I didn't have too much I wanted to say. There's a lot I'd like to say. I wanted to keep it brief. Gary was one of the most remarkable psychologists, scholar, clinician, thoughtful, great sense of humor. Any time I spent with him was always worthwhile. One of the things I always admired when he'd give a talk, he'd have a bunch of slides, and on each slide was one word. No bullet point, just one word, and he'd talk for about a half hour on that slide. And the slide kept centering us. But then comes the next slide and another half hour. And the time would fly by and his comments were always remarkable. I just was in awe of him, and still am in awe of him. The breadth and the scope of knowledge he had, not just about autism, but he also had a gift of communicating that knowledge in ways of all kinds could understand and appreciate. But then there's some other more fun stuff, and I'm glad Todd's here. Because you remember Scotland? Remember me walking on the plane while you guys were sitting there because my flight was, I thought, was canceled. So at the last minute, I got another flight that was Todd, Brian, and Gary were on. And they thought I was going on a different flight to Scotland to play golf for the week. My club didn't make it for 2 days, but we went ahead and I rented some clubs and I think, did you give me some clothes? Todd might have given me a bit of clothes. That was like one of the best weeks of my life, playing golf with these guys on British Open courses. Another sport thing was we had season tickets together for the Tar Heels. We did, I don't know how many years we did it. They were good seats. We each had one ticket because neither of our wives were particularly interested in going to a football game. And my kids were out at home, so they no longer would be going to the game. But I'd say with his travel schedule and a little bit of mine, with a few Jewish holidays thrown in, we didn't go to a lot of games together. Maybe 1 or 2 games a year we actually sat together, which was nice. But we did have tickets together. And then the last thing I wanted to just talk about a little bit and reflect on was what Don just talked about and what we just started doing with the Scotch. I don't know how regular it was, but it was regular enough that we would get together periodically and just have a Scotch, and we'd take turns who paid for it. And we did a remarkable job of remembering who paid the last time. The person was sure to remind the other one. And then savoring the Scotch was really fun, and the conversations are always good. So lots of memories of one kind or another. These are just a few of mine. Thanks.
Hi Gary, really nice to talk to everybody. I think one of my most favourable memories was when Gary came over to the University of Northampton to get his honorary doctorate, and we chuckled most of the morning because our university has an extremely funny doctoral hat, which Gary absolutely adored and kept putting it on and taking it off and putting it on. And we had a real old laugh. He really wanted to take it home, but they wouldn't allow him. And I begged and begged, but they wouldn't let him take it. But it was a good day. And Gary got his award for the years and years of work that he'd done with thousands and thousands of professionals and families in Northampton. So a really well-deserved honorary doctorate. Gary, hello. It's nice to see you. So too many memories, Gary, too many. I had a wonderful time at Chapel Hill when my twins were 3. And again, you taught me lots, you mentored me, and then you helped me to set up autism courses at the University of Northampton, even lending me Eric Chopler's office to look at university curricula that you were familiar with. Gary, we continued on with our relationship, becoming firm colleagues. We co-authored a book which is still selling fast, parents and professionals still wanting to learn more about how to use teach strategies. I'm retired now and living a fairly nice life of leisure and so on.
Okay, Sam, from Australia.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm Sam Brasington. I'm in Perth as well, Western Australia, with Louise. I just feel so privileged to be here today and early hours of the morning and be part of this huge community. I stumbled on North Carolina through teaching. I'm an educator, and I got to live and work in North Carolina for 3 years. And I remember being the only Aussie teacher in a very little school in Lillington, Hunter County.
said, does anybody want to go to teach training? And I said, I'll go. So luckily they sent the only Aussie teacher out to do that, and it's been absolutely life transforming for me and my career. And I have worked really hard to be part of Teach and to get as much training and be a part of all the information and knowledge and share that one with other people. So it's been a real privilege to be a part of it. And yeah, like I said, somebody said to be starstruck. I definitely feel that way myself. So it's just lovely to know that there's so much work out there all over the world that we're working towards, and it's from Gary and Eric and all the hard research and work that everybody's done. So yeah, thank you. Thank you, Gary.
So do you try and get some sleep now? It must be after 4 a.m. or do you just give this up as a lost evening?
Oh, that's all good. It's just a pleasure to be a part of it. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Hi everyone, I'm Louise. I'm a special needs teacher from Perth, Western Australia. Sam Preston is also my friend. She's a colleague of mine. We work with the education department here in WA. Yes, as Don said, it's 4 to 4 in the morning, so I'm very tired. We've got a full day at school tomorrow, so it's going to be quite interesting how I roll tomorrow. I have some wonderful memories of Gary. I've had the privilege of knowing him since 1999 when I first met him in the UK at a teach course with Kathy in Kesbury. From there I had the privilege of him coming to sit in my classroom and watching me teach, and then work with my students. Watching Gary sit down with one of my students, his name is Ruben, he's a 12-year-old boy, non-verbal with autism, who loves Teletubbies. And he particularly likes the purple one and would always have the purple Teletubby underneath his arm. For a non-verbal student with autism, Gary still managed to have a conversation with him. And as a person to sit in the room and watch that, it was such an honour to see the way Gary had such a manner that you could actually have a chat with him and talk to Ruben and get a conversation going with Ruben using his text folder. It was a privilege to watch. It was such an honour, so much that Gary has influenced and teachers influenced my life since '99 in everything I do for kids with autism, and I have utmost respect, and I can't be more honoured to be a part of this song, and I thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of this, and thank you for this opportunity to have my 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Louise.
I am in Iceland, and I think that's highly appropriate to say I'm from Iceland to Gary. Because I actually got to know Keats in the year 1989. So I've been connected for almost 33 years now. It's a long time. And after that 5-day training, the three of us from Iceland, we all went back. And I went back to spend the year with Jack Wall in Charlotte. And then I continued on and I went to the UNC Chapel Speech and Hearing Scientist. And there, Gary became my mentor because I did my research in 3 classrooms in Chapel Hill, looking at spontaneous communication. And it was a pretty wonderful time with Gary. And he was always a wonderful mentor to me, and I could always write to him through all these years. And that's why I was getting a big surprise when usually I would write to him. He would write back the same day or the next day. It was very unusual for someone who was that busy. But he came to Iceland once, and I invited him. We had a 2-day training here in Iceland, of course on autism. And by the end of the training, we had this one question that kind of sit with me because the way he was approaching the question, and the question was, so how do I start? And he looked at me and said, well, and I kind of whispered, I thought I could talk to him about that for 2 days, but you know, and then he looked around and we had a whiteboard right behind him, and he said, we write to them, and we draw on perhaps, and then he turned around and say, actually, there is no one way. And that's why there is no how to book, because every single one of them is so unique. You gotta get to know every one of them. And that's how we need to start. You have to make connections, and that's how we need to begin. And that kind of response sits with me through the years. And it's really important to know everybody, and everybody is unique. No one way to do this. And thank you, Gary, for everything you've done for me and so many people back in Iceland. We are still doing a lot of team training, and I'm actually doing that right now here in Iceland. And that's my family. I live in the States. I live in Arizona. Here in Iceland, we do teach training. So it's still there after all these years. Thank you.
Thank you, Svandi, so much. I just want to say before we continue, I know some of you came in after we started. Gary sent a message yesterday to all of you, and I just want to read it again. I am proud of you and all that you've accomplished to make the world a better place. Kay.
I'm Kay from Japan. I'm not a professional in the field of autism. I'm not a parent. I am an interpreter, as Tomko said, but Eric and Gary taught me a very important thing in my profession. That is, they're teaching people that the person with autism has a culture of autism. I learned from them that there is a culture of...
It's muted.
Oh. Yeah. Third time. I'll start from the beginning. Can you hear me? People on the Zoom? Yeah? I'm Kay. I'm from Japan. I'm not a professional in the field of autism. I'm not a parent. I'm an interpreter. But Eric and Gary taught me a very important thing in my profession. They teach culture of autism. They advocate culture of autism. And through interpreting them, I learned that there is a culture of speakers and culture of audience. So in order to be an interpreter, I have to understand the culture of audience and culture of speakers. And that's how we can communicate, or we can help communicating between the speakers and audience. So I'm very grateful for Eric and Gary and other teach members. There are other things I want to tell you. Don talked about typhoon. Yes, Gary every year has brought typhoon to Japan. Actually, typhoon arrives when Gary arrives, and it sometimes made your trip very difficult. There are other things Gary brought to Japan. Another one is Starbucks coffee. Well, I think when he first came to Japan, there were no Starbucks coffee shops. One by one, the Starbucks coffee shops increased in number, and also people know that Gary loves Starbucks. So in the initial years, when they don't have any Starbucks coffee shop in Saga, the staffs of Tomoko went to Fukuoka to buy Starbucks coffee and make Starbucks coffee in Saga. And the third thing, Don talked about that Gary has a bad handwriting, but he left many bad handwriting on the shoulder, on the back of the teachers. Every time they come to Japan, Japanese people love to get autographs. So they ask the speakers, whether it's Eric or Gary or Laura, they ask them to write autographs on the back of the t-shirts they bought. So there are now many t-shirts with autographs of a man of bad handwriting. Thank you.
Kay shared a story with me, and she didn't want to attribute it to her, so I just attributed it to an interpreter, and I even called him a he. So you folks are the only ones who will know this. But the story is she was interpreting for someone who didn't understand the Japanese culture. So while the presenter was talking, what Kay was doing was, under the guise of interpreting, saying, this person doesn't understand our culture, he doesn't understand, you won't understand what he's saying, so when I finish, I'll finish when he finishes, and would you applaud as if you appreciated what he said? Of course, Kay, Susan and I want to get over the next few years around to all of you if we can, but I am going to be a little nervous if you're interpreting for me.
I'm Gladys Williams. I started working with Gary in 1996, which is when I came to teach. And he involved me in the social group, working with some of the adults I teach. And over the years since then, I've just learned so much from Gary in so many different ways. And it was really hard to say, gee, what one thing am I going to choose to talk about? And I decided I just select something a little different. And so I'm going to talk just briefly about developing a course on autism, a service learning course at UNC. And this was a course for UNC undergraduates who are interested in learning about autism and doing some service work in lots of different ways around the university and around the community. And Gary really encouraged me to develop this course, and he also provided me with just incredible resources to help me in developing lectures and materials and ideas for the course. So he was just so instrumental in this course development and in his mentoring for the course. And I ended up teaching this course for 13 years at UNC. One of my favorite things, of many favorite things, that I was able to do at UNC. And a lot of the students who took the course ended up staying in the field of autism or being involved in autism in one way or another. And so it was just just another example of the many ways Gary's had an important influence on the lives of so many people. Then just one other thing I want to do at the end here is, the end of my speaking here, is sort of jumping off again from what David was talking about. I want to say hello to Gary and send love from the many people, several people who are in our dinner group, this dinner group is a group of folks from the Chapel Hill area who have been part of the social group that Gary got started, along with Kathy, many years ago, and have known each other in many cases for several decades. And there's this group of us who are still getting together for dinner a couple times a month, and it's been wonderful. Gary joined us a few times over these years, and I know everybody from this group would want to join me in sending Gary our love. Thanks, Gary.